Hi there. Sorry about this.
That's all right. I'm Joel.
Nice seeing you.
Okay. Well, you know the magazine. It's the columns when I was 25.
Right. Where was I when I was 25? I got to figure that out.
The type of person reading this is going to be a 25 to 30-year-old and young whippersnappers who probably are hoping to get too much too fast. But keep that in mind, because I think your story kind of has a lesson.
Well, when I was 25, I faced the prospect of leaving my country and coming to America because I'd been offered a job by ABC. Well, before that, ABC had offered me a job, and I declined it because I was so nervous. America was such a bigger canvas to paint on, and I was, believe it or not, quite frightened that it was too big and that I wouldn't be able to deal with it. I didn't have much education. I didn't think I was really quite ready to play in the big leagues. And then I woke up 6 months later in a cold sweat and said, oh God, what have I done? And I phoned them back and said, could I come anyway? So I went to Montreal to see U.S. immigration people. One of the questions they were obliged to ask you was, were you going to make your living by prostitution? I said, no, I was going into television, and he laughed, as if somehow it were synonymous. And I spent my first year, my 25th year, running around and sometimes being chased around the Deep South by the Ku Klux Klan, who did not take kindly to the network news coverage of the Civil Rights Drive. We had just been chased by the Klan from Natchez, Mississippi, all the way to Jackson, a high-speed car chase, which was terrifying. And we were very frightened, because they clearly meant to do us harm. We got into our hotel, we called our boss. My boss had had a few drinks. He called the governor of Mississippi and said, my boys don't get protection. I'm coming down there with 80 cameras to do the Mississippi story. And we got protection. But in that, the next night, I got a call from them and say, we want you to come to New York and anchor the broadcast. It's interesting what a contrast I find with some of the 25-year-olds I know today who would like nothing more than to anchor a broadcast. That was the last thing I wanted to do. It was the last thing I wanted to do. The network emphasis was going to be on young people. I was the youngest guy with my teeth and my hair. And I remember calling John Scally, who was then our State Department correspondent, saying, John, I don't want to do this, I don't want to do this. He understood, and I did it anyway. And 3 years later, I realized it was a mistake, and I quit.
What was it about at 26, and you're anchoring the news, and you said 3 years later you knew it was a mistake?
Oh, I was too young. I was too young. I didn't have the experience. Anchoring is a very serious job. But I realized that I had taken myself off the learning curve.
By being off the learning curve, can you tell me some mistakes you made while on the
Oh,
bus?
God, you name it, I made it. I was also I'd only been in the country a year, too. So I was scrambling desperately, not just to enjoy everything America had to offer, but to learn about it. And I'd had no American history in school to speak of. Hadn't had much schooling anyway.
When it comes to education, tell me why you didn't finish formal education.
I don't know. I've never figured it out. Except I think I was bored. I had a natural swing for a lot of things. And for a period of time got by on that. When life got tougher and subjects became more complicated, I realized you couldn't do that, and I then became the next thing to a workaholic. But I became consumed by the notion of working and learning. I think I may have been bored in school. I think it may have had something to do with teachers, most of whom I have no particular recollection of, because they didn't arrest my attention.
What grade?
I finished grade 9. And I did not finish grade 10. At least to my recollection, I finished grade 9. I probably didn't pass everything. I probably didn't pass chemistry or something. And yet, ironically, I remember enjoying chemistry, and my daughter, who's now 17, adores chemistry. And I said to her the other day, it must be in the genes, because I remember enjoying the notion of chemistry.
And your parents, their reaction when in grade 9 said...
Well, they were pretty... My parents were surprisingly passive about this. But I've also never figured that out either. My father encouraged... I wanted to be a broadcaster. I wanted to be a journalist. My father... It was clear I wanted to follow my father's footsteps in some way. He was well educated. My mother was not. But he encouraged me not to go into broadcasting right away, but to go and work in a bank, which I did for almost 3 years. I was a teller, cashier in a bank, and I loved it. I enjoyed working with the public. I coached the women's softball team, the Royal Bank of Canada, for a while. I was on the bowling team. I mean, it was a good life. I've never had anything to seriously complain about, but it took finally getting into journalism to realize how much there was to learn. I spent 7 years in the Middle East. The Middle East taught me that the more I learned, the less I knew. The more I learned, the less I knew. The more I learned, the less I knew.
You said before in covering the civil rights movement, being a Canadian helped you. You weren't biased.
Well, as a Canadian, I had not become embroiled in this great national struggle. When I was 25 and just arriving off the boat, so to speak, I hadn't yet had a time to develop anything other than the instinctive values, which was it was wrong for one group of people to suppress another. And so it was totally common sense to me to identify in some way with the black struggle for civil rights and voting rights. At the same time, as I'd not grown up with any dismissive notion of Southern whites, I think I tended to see the Southern reaction to these changes as fear, not just oppression. I mean, it was oppression, of course, but it was also fear.
What influenced you as a child? What was your family like? How did your background?
Well, my parents were very supportive, and my father always had interesting people in the house. I think it's absolutely the direct route for me into journalism. My parents' house always had politicians, actors, writers, diplomats, musicians in the house, because that was what my father felt very strongly about culture, and I, by the way, also feel very strongly about culture. America for me is, as much as anything else, a culture story. Cleveland is different from Pittsburgh.
How did you relate to American culture in the 60s? You were in your 20s. Fresh from Canada.
To be perfectly honest, if you're talking about music and stuff,
yeah.
When I came here, we worked so goddamn hard all the time. You know, I almost missed the Beatles. I didn't miss the Beatles, but I almost missed the Beatles. On the other hand, I love country music. And it was it was in the back roads of the South and the Southwest that I first heard country music and began to see country music as a real metaphor for life. You know, a man and his gun and his dog and his truck and his woman. That all resonates with me in terms of people I have met and known.
But what about the culture of the 60s? And you had the student movements, you had the upheaval, the war.
I don't think I necessarily identified with it. I didn't make judgments because it was also I covered Barry Goldwater in 1964, and in the long run have come to think that Barry Goldwater is truly one of the greatest Americans I've ever met. And his whole notion that America had power and had the ability to go and win a war if we would only commit ourselves to win the war, was also a very important point for a great many people in the nation.
Tell me more about your big break, so to speak.
See, I don't think of it as a big break. I really swear to God I don't. I was not happy about the decision at the time. It was not something I wanted to do. I didn't think it was a big break. And I was shadowed all the time by my own notion that this was too soon. And by the way, there were tons of people out there who were more than happy to say that it was too soon. It wasn't much fun competing against Chet Huntley and David Brinkley and Walter Cronkite. I tell the story sometimes of being at a luncheon with the two of them. Somebody in the audience got up and said to Huntley, you guys are just in show business. And Huntley said, that's not true. He said, I make only one concession to show business. On the way to the studio every day, I stop and I have them paint these big bags underneath my eyes so that people can't see them. He had incredible bags under his eyes. And Cronkite said, oh, come on, Chet. He said, Peter stops in, hasn't painted on. And a reminder of what a whippersnapper I was. But we got through it. I had the sense. There's no doubt in my mind that ABC would have fired me at some point.
You seem to be very wise at 26 to realize you probably shouldn't have been in that seat. And probably a lot of people reading this magazine and their whatever professions they want to be in are giving you the corner office. Well, what do you say to today's 25-year-old? What kind of advice do you give them?
Well, I really think the most important thing is to have fun. I was in a bar last night on the east side waiting for some friends, and a young woman in her mid-20s came in, very cute, blonde, clearly 24, 25, 26. And I said, what do you do in New York? She said, well, I came here because my husband, he works on Wall Street. She said, well, it's work, 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 work all the time. It's make money, money, money all the time. I felt very sorry for her in a way. Because when I came to New York as a 25-year-old, I didn't have any money. And I realized then that I didn't need any money to have a great time. We used to go to night court all the time in the middle of the night. So my advice to 25 years old is, first of all, to do what you care about. But because the world is moving so fast all the time, that to waste any time doing something you don't really love is to me to waste, is to me to be the ultimate waste.